Good afternoon and welcome to today's client training, where you will learn how to take your portfolio to the next level with Mobilytics. We do have a large audience, so everyone is muted. If you will, make sure to use the Q&A feature to share your questions throughout today's training. Now go ahead and let us know using the chat where you're tuning in from, where you're watching us from. Now, for those that may not know me, I'm Cheyenne Robinson. I'm our customer marketing specialist here at Buxton. We're welcoming today Philip Rowe, our Senior Vice President of Product. He's been with Buxton since 2005 and has been involved from the conception of Mobilytics and leads the strategy for all our products. Today, Philip is going to share more about Mobilytics and how you can maximize your subscription. And then we'll get into a live demonstration of the product. We'll answer live questions at the end. There will also be a short feedback poll. Before we dive in, will everyone let us know using the chat if you can see my screen? I see we have folks from all over joining us today. Welcome. If you'll just use the chat and let me know if you're able to see my screen. Awesome, great, thank you all. So we'll go ahead and kick off today, and Philip's going to tell us more about what Mobilytics is, and then we'll dive into how to utilize it. Then we'll get into the Q&A. Again, make sure you use the Q&A for any questions you have throughout today's training. Now, many of you on today's call are familiar with Mobilytics and use it on a regular basis, so you know the precision of the data. But for those who may be new to the product, will you tell us more about the history behind Mobilytics, Philip?
Yeah, thank you, Cheyenne, and thank you to everybody who's participating today. I look forward to talking about our Mobilytics product. So Buxton's retail analytics are founded on the philosophy that the key to understanding retail performance is in having a deep understanding of who your customers are, where those people live, work, and play, and how their value is impacted by things like distance, competition, friendly brands, and other market variables. Since our inception, we've always been able to understand who lived and worked in the trade areas, but we had little visibility before mobile data into who was passing through the area and who might have been visiting a competitor's location. So as early as 2010, we began exploring different types of data to help us answer this question. We formed an exclusive partnership with one of the largest cellular providers in the country to test the viability of using cellular tower signal data early on. A few years later, we developed an exclusive partnership with Visa to leverage their de-identified and aggregated consumer spend signal data. And then the first GPS signal data that we actually tested for these purposes came from connected cars. All of these seemed promising initially and had their own utility, but ultimately none of these data sets were truly able to answer our who questions with the accuracy and confidence that we required. So we began evaluating GPS signal data from consumers' mobile devices in around 2014. And for the first time, we found data that could potentially answer our who questions, but the data had not yet matured to the point that it was really useful for Buxton's purposes. It was often inconsistent and it had sparse consumer coverage, but we knew that the data just needed a little bit more time to mature, for the technology to evolve, and for the needed data agreements to happen in the marketplace. So we set our first goal toward understanding every provider in the landscape of mobile data and all the different nuances of the providers that provided such data. Our second goal was to go out and license the best of the best. And so to that end, we scoured the marketplace, looked at every data provider that existed, and that's an ongoing effort. We still do that today. We never stop looking for best-in-class data to bring into our mobile data panel. As we set out to accomplish both of these goals, though, we quickly realized that most mobility data was far from intuitive or easy to use out of the box. It required a high degree of creative data science and a lot of nuanced interpretation in many different use cases. Device signals were often inaccurate, and new devices would come into the data, other devices would drop off and disappear. And we found that oftentimes there was really no correlation with sales or other type of performance metrics that we could see in the data. It was hard to know what percentage of real world visitors were being captured or customers were being captured. And we wrestled with such questions such as, should we include the shared parking lot? Or what's going to happen next time Apple releases a new iOS security update? And so all of these things were things that we wrestled with through the years. But we were able to leverage our advantages as being Buxton and having been in the industry and been in customer analytics for over 30 years to help us work through these challenges. First, as I mentioned, we had 30 years of big data analytics experience. So through that 30 years, we developed proprietary methodologies, both for analyzing data, as well as for manipulating huge data sets like this. So we immediately had a jump start that most companies that were entering the space didn't have toward even just being able to work with these giant data sets in an efficient manner. Second, as the largest aggregator of consumer and business data in the market, we were uniquely positioned to be able to enrich and analyze the mobile data and the patterns that we saw in it. And then last, but certainly not least, our longstanding client relationships with thousands of different brands provided us with unique access to be able to test this data against actual location sales, customer records, and transactions for most of the retail locations in the US. And that's allowed us to develop an understanding of the relationships between mobile data and real world performance data in a way that nobody else has the ability to do in the market today. The most consistently accurate use case that we identified for the data was to be able to accurately profile customers and visitors and then to understand, to truly understand trade areas of where those people were coming from, where they lived and where they worked. We found the data also to be fairly strong for understanding visitation patterns and trends such as seasonal spikes or busy days and times. But generally, we found the data to be much less reliable when it came to understanding or trying to project a location's performance. And this was the primary use case that we saw many other platforms in the marketplace focused on as they look to help brokers better market their properties. So our retail analytics history has shown us that success in the retail world typically isn't driven from overall traffic to a shopping center. Instead, it's based on having enough of the right type of traffic or enough of your types of customers. And we saw that we were in a unique position in the marketplace to be able to answer those types of questions in the products that we would develop with the mobile data. So it was around this differentiation that when we set out to develop automated platform-based analytics with the mobile data, that we centered our vision around this idea of who the visitors were.
Thanks, Philip. It's really interesting to know that this process started over a decade ago and making sure that we have the right data and that we're able to make it actionable for our clients. So thanks for telling us about the history of it. What's one fact about Mobilytics that everyone should know about the product?
Yeah, kind of building on what I just talked about, that idea of identifying the who in the visitor traffic and in the who in the data is really unique to Buxton. There's other platforms that are in the market today that don't really do that. We're the only ones that are actually appending data to the actual mobile device signals and doing so at a household level that allows you to understand who those people are and then where others who look just like them live, work, and play within your markets of operation.
Speaking of Buxton's mobile data, can you tell us more about how it's unique and why users should be confident in the data behind it?
Sure. And again, I think it comes back to truly being able to use this data to understand who is visiting a place. The first differentiator is in data granularity. We are the only platform in the market that utilizes both household level attributes, meaning the data that we know about every household in the country. We have those attributes at the household level. We actually have them down to the individual level. For Mobilytics, we use the household level data. But we not only have the household level attributes, but we append that data at the individual household level. So we're not taking block group level data and trying to say that everybody, all the mobile device signals that came from a particular block group have the same dimensions. We're differentiating at the individual household level. And we know through our experience how meaningful and how important that is to be able to accurately answer that who question. Second, we include both psychographics and demographics as we go to understand who individuals are and who visitors are to a property. Third, there's a lot of noise in the mobile data. It can be very, very challenging to truly determine if a device was at a retail location or if it was actually at its neighbor or across the street. There's a lot of noise, and a lot of the data and the use cases in the market that we've seen today don't do a very good job of eliminating that noise. So we develop proprietary what we call proprietary signal clustering techniques that really allow us to have a high degree of confidence that a device is where we think it is when we go to count it in our analyses. And then finally, we don't just evaluate who the visitors are when we're defining the profiles and trying to determine who has the highest affinity to be a visitor of a place. It's not just enough to append data to the visitors to a place and see how that distributes. You need to then take that and compare it to the relevant underlying population to understand which attributes or which segments, in the case of psychographic segmentation, which of those attributes truly have a high affinity to be a visitor to a place. So those are all things that combine in how we utilize the data, both in Mobilytics and in our other analytics here at Buxton, that are truly unique in the marketplace today.
One final question that I have for you, Philip, is what would you consider to be the top use cases recommended for users in retail or healthcare industries?
I don't know if I could say these are the top, but I can speak to two that we see quite commonly among our clients. The first is competitive insights. You probably have and hopefully if you work with Buxton, you have a high level understanding of your customers and who they are and how they relate to your performance of your locations. But it's doubtful that you have the ability to understand similar insights on your competitors. And so we see a lot of our clients using Mobilytics to understand where those intersections lie between their customers and a competitor's locations, and how those are differentiated in the different markets that they operate in. And then they're using that understanding to understand which battles they need to fight, which customer groups they need to focus on, and which customer groups are more at risk in various local situations. And then second, I would say is probably in making real estate decisions. Now, I can't speak for all of our clients who are using this data, but what I can say is I would probably not ever make a real estate decision solely using mobile insights. I think it's a valuable piece of the puzzle, and one that we recommend, and that's kind of how we recommend the use of this data to our clients. But when you get into a situation where you might have two different properties that are in close proximity, in fact, they could even be, across the street from one another, they're likely going to have similar trade area sizes and probably similar trade area dynamics in terms of the underlying population. But who's actually visiting those two different centers and the patterns that are represented at those two properties? That can be the difference between choosing a winner versus a loser. So we almost view it more as a tiebreaker in conjunction with all of the other analytical tools that we provide.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, let's go ahead and dive into our live demonstration, and afterwards we'll get into the Q&A. So if you have any questions, make sure you're submitting them through the Q&A function.
Great. Let me share my screen with everyone. Okay, great. So obviously, we're not going to have time today to dive into all the things that Mobilytics does or all the use cases that I'd like to be able to show you. Maybe Cheyenne, you guys can have me back for another session, and we can do that. Do this again with other people to walk through all the value that we see in the Mobilytics platform. But I did want to highlight one use case that we see pretty commonly with many of our users today. And it has to do with helping to really optimize their local marketing efforts. So in this example, I'm going to pretend that I'm a fitness concept, and I'm going to come into the Mobilytics tool, and let's just look at the fitness concepts here in the Fort Worth market where I'm located. And I'm going to look at this location right here. There's two locations right here. This is an Anytime Fitness. I'm going to pretend as if I am Anytime Fitness in this case. So I'm going to select that location for analysis. And I want to compare that location to this competitor that's in close proximity here, just to the northwest. This is a Crunch Fitness location. I'm sorry, excuse me, a Blink Fitness location that competes against that Anytime Fitness. I'm going to select that for our analysis. And what I want to understand is how are these locations, trade areas interacting? And then I want to understand who the customers are to this Anytime Fitness, and where am I winning those customers and against this Blink Fitness, and where am I potentially losing them, in this trade area. So let's launch in, and I'm just going to look at a few key pieces of the Mobilytics analysis. Again, we're not going to have time to go through each component here that we show today. But I want to jump first, and let's go look at the visitor persona, because we want to understand who the customers are to that Anytime Fitness, so that when I go try to attract and bring in new members to this location, I know who I'm trying to attract, or where I'm winning and where I'm losing. And so there's a couple of things that pop out here, but first let's talk about how to read this and some of the things that Mobilytics is doing as it displays this data. So one concept that we find useful in Mobilytics is this idea of having sort of a primary selection. In this case, I selected Anytime Fitness first, and then every other selection, like my Blink Fitness location, or if I was to add additional data for comparison, those are sort of your secondary data sets. So the Anytime, that primary selection is important because it drives what shows up here in this section of visitor persona. It's the primary place that we chose to analyze. And so in this example, these variables are the elements, both the demographic and psychographic elements, that we saw that were most unusual or most prominent for the members of this particular Anytime Fitness location. They were the most descriptive things that statistically popped, so to speak, for this Anytime Fitness location. So that's our point of comparison, or we're comparing on the things that matter to us based on this primary selection. So these are indexed figures. So 100 is average, and you can see anytime you hover over things in Mobilytics, you'll get a pop-up box that can kind of explain how to read the data, what it means. In this example, by 100 being average, the way to read this would be that 17%, the customers of Anytime Fitness are 17% more likely to fall into the 100 to 149,000 income range. They're 35% more likely to be Hispanic than the average household in the area. And so these are things that immediately pop as I think about who I'm going to be marketing to try to bring new members into my gym here, into my facility. So now that I know who I'm pursuing, let's go back up to the top of our analysis here, and let's look more closely at the trade area here of these two locations and how they interact. There's a lot going on here, so I want to break it down a little bit. We have our two locations that are here on the map. You can see our Blink Fitness location is indicated by our blue icon, which corresponds to our selection bar here at the top. And we have our red icon and location, which corresponds to our Anytime Fitness location. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit, and you can see here that the hexagonal cells don't go out forever. They stop. Why is that? Well, these are representing the trade areas of these two businesses. So they're only going to go out, in this case, as far as the trade areas that we've identified through the data for these businesses. Now, I'm also going to highlight a couple of a feature here that we find to be quite useful, and that's the hide feature. So I can come in and I can hide the data associated with one of the selections. You can see there I hid the data for Anytime Fitness, and now I don't see that data anymore. And then I could come back and I could do the same thing for the Blink Fitness data. Well, one thing that pops out immediately is that this Anytime Fitness has a much tighter trade area than the Blink Fitness. Blink Fitness is drawing people in from a much broader area than our Anytime Fitness location is. You can also see that we've got the dots on the map, the blue and the red dots. These are the actual visitors as indicated by our legend down here. And we'll use those more here in just a moment. But I'm going to turn them off for right now. because I want to talk about one thing that happens here on the map, and this is an insight that probably most of our users don't really understand as good as they should. But so if I go turn off our Blink Fitness location, you'll see that up here in the top right portion of this trade area, these cells are all red, indicating they're part of the Anytime Fitness trade area. And you notice that when I hover over any particular hexagonal cell, you can see a couple of numbers. In this case, I see 1,107 and 3.22% of visitors. That 1,107 is telling me that there's 1,107 potential customers, lookalike households in this area that represents about 3.22% of all the potential customers based on the trade area that we would envision visiting this Anytime Fitness. If I come unhide our Blink data, you'll see all of those cells turn blue. And the reason that is because there's actually more Blink Fitness potential customers in that area than there are Anytime Fitness. So we're always going to show the dominant color wherever you have trade area overlap. We're trying to show who has greater potential in that particular geography. And you can see that represented here. Our modal has now changed so that if I float over some of these cells, I can see in this area right here, for example, that I have about 2,400 Blink Fitness potential customers, while I've only got about 1,900 Anytime Fitness potential customers. So now I know kind of where I'm winning, where I have more potential to win and more potential to lose within the trade area, where I should be winning, where I should be losing. So now that I know where Anytime Fitness's trade area is and where they have more potential and less potential, let's go turn our dots back on, because what I want to look for is I want to find areas that I should be winning as Anytime Fitness, but I don't really appear to be. There's a lot of blue dots coming out of these areas of the trade area. And in this cell in particular, I should have, there's about 2,500 households that should be my members as Anytime Fitness. But and we can toggle our Blink Fitness location on and off here, and you can see, yeah, there is a lot more blue dots and blue customers coming out of both of these areas right here. And so that tells me this is an area that I want to focus on. I now know who I want to go focus on. And if we zoom in on the map, we can see more clearly kind of where that is as we turn off some of the data, now that we know this area a little bit better. And so now that I understand where that area is, I can actually come back into Mobilytics and use one more tool. I would probably dive into Scout and use some of Scout's tools as well, or I might actually use our advanced reporting to continue this line of thinking and understand even more fully at a segmentation level who some of these customers are, so that I could perhaps go market to them. But this is my starting point. This tells me where I need to be looking, where I need to be going. And so as I move down and look at some of our visitor origination insights, I can quickly see which zip codes those are. And if I just wanted to do a quick digital media buy, this would give me the direction I needed to be able to go make that happen. So that's just, again, one use case. There's many others, but that's one that we've seen quite common recently amongst our client base.
Thanks, Philip, for an amazing demonstration today. So we are going to get into the Q&A next. Before we do that, we'll have a quick pause just so you can give us some feedback and give you a little bit more time to put your questions in the Q&A. I see several people have already submitted questions, so thank you. We'll get to those here in a moment. If you'll just answer the short feedback poll, and again, put any questions you have into the Q&A. And again, like Philip mentioned, we just scratched the surface and the capabilities that Mobilytics has to offer. You can always reach out to us for a coaching or training call for additional support in using Mobilytics and getting the most out of your subscription. So we have a question that's come through the Q&A here for you, Philip. It says, what are some of the best practices for exporting and sharing Mobilytics data with our internal teams?
Great. Yeah. We have a number of ways that you can share the findings and the insights out of Mobilytics. And one of the ways that we see commonly used out of our clients, there's a digital share link. This is really beneficial that for sort of sharing an interactive analysis, because the recipient of that, and it can be shared internally in your organization or with somebody who's not a part of your organization, but they essentially have access to an interactive version of the analysis that you've run. They can manipulate the map and zoom in and zoom out, and they can manipulate the charts and see hover data and that sort of thing. And so that seems to be used quite a bit, but we also have individual component exporting that can be exported as a CSV or a PDF file. So if you just want to focus on one particular aspect of the analysis, that's something that we see being used for a lot of presentations and other analyses that our clients are pulling together.
Great. So another question through the Q&A. This person says, I primarily work with our site selection team, but are there other types of people within an organization that utilize or should be utilizing Mobilytics?
Yeah, there are many roles that benefit from better understanding the dynamics of their locations, of their competitors, of their friendly brands and co-tenants, of the shopping centers in which they locate. We see a lot of marketers as well as individuals in roles in operations, as well as strategy and franchise sales. I'd say those are some of the most common ones, but really kind of a widespread use of both, vertically up and down our client organizations in those areas.
And another question here we've gotten says, how do your clients typically apply the Mobilytics visitor profiles?
I think there's a few common uses. One in understanding who customers are and how this varies by location across their store network. This helps them improve their local store marketing as well as their operations strategies. I think second would be probably identifying areas of market opportunity where there are concentrations of lookalike households. So, one of the power of that household level profiling and being able to understand who visitors are, but then to be able to translate that, whether that's in the Mobilytics tool or whether that's through the integration with Scout, to understand where those people are located within their trade areas and markets of operation. That's something we see commonly. And then knowing which customer groups they are winning with, and really how that compares to the competition. So similar to what I just showed in the demo, really understanding where those intersections lie between their customers.
And then here's another question. It says, how would you use this data for digital local marketing?
Yeah, so one of the ways that I just demonstrated is one of the ways that we see being utilized commonly. But really first for helping defining that who question is the foundational use case, which is I want to understand who's coming into my location today and who's not. And if there's a particular customer group that I'm not winning at, then that informs my strategy. But it's primarily for helping me understand who I need to be targeting and where those individuals are located within the market. So from a marketing perspective, helping develop strategy, as well as helping focus my targeting efforts from a audience definition perspective and a geographic refinement perspective.
Great, thank you, Philip. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We did get quite a few questions, so we'll be following up with several of you through email. Now, this does conclude our webinar for today. We appreciate you joining us. As I mentioned earlier, this just scratches the surface for what's available and the capabilities of Mobilytics. Reach out anytime to schedule a coaching or training call, and be sure to tune in next month for our Back to Basics training, where we will help you get a fresh start to navigating your Buxton platform. Have a great day, and we'll see you for our next webinar in February.